Hi, Tom Tedford.
Mike for a question.
Oh, okay. Sure.
Check 1, 2, check in sound, check, check. Just a reminder, please mute your lines, and otherwise we will have to mute you for you. So, again, we'll try and get started here on time or close to it, but thanks so much.
Thank you. Exactly.
I can't tell you that. I'm assuming it'll be in the room.
We're going to have speakers coming out here shortly. So we're going to arrange everybody a little bit cozy. So if you feel like you have good personal space, maybe take a couple steps closer to where you're standing. And when Brianna comes out here, we'll try to situate everybody. Sorry.
Charlie, you're
I think we're going to need some folks to step forward just a little bit and have some folks who are on the end. Yep. I just want to read the. Okay, I'll turn like sideways.
Yeah.
Turn sideways. Stand right here. We might do some more situating too. Yes. Okay. Good. Got a lot of situating. Exactly. Go in the corner. Go in the back. That's right. Wherever you tell. Yeah, she's never been on the side of one of these press conferences before.
Thanks for being here, you guys. Really appreciate it. So yeah, come on over. Nick, why don't you take this side as well, and then Joe, you can take that side. Great. Thanks everybody for being here. We appreciate your interest. First, I want to start with, I want to introduce everybody who's behind me. We have a lot of folks, but honored to be joined by a number of our statewide elected officials and cabinet leaders who are here to demonstrate our unity in the face of some challenges we're experiencing with the federal government. The statewide elected officials who are here include Denny Heck, of course, our Lieutenant Governor, Mike Plecciati, our State Treasurer, Chris Reichel, our Superintendent of Public Schools, Nick Brown, our Attorney General. You'll be hearing from Nick shortly. After I give my initial remarks, you will hear from Nick. You'll also hear from Joe Wynn, who's our Commerce Secretary. He'll speak about the state's coordinated response to potential tariffs. And Tana Sen, of course, Secretary of DCYF, who'll provide an update on the rapid response team to support children and families impacted by potential mass deportation policies. We're joined by a number of other elected officials as well. I saw Senator Elias, Senator Saldana, and others are here as well. I just appreciate all of them who have especially busy schedules now with committees and everything going on to take some time to join us today. So on my inauguration, which I think was exactly a month ago, I promised to work with President Trump where I can and to stand up to him when we must. That promise still stands. Unfortunately, President Trump is showing very little inclination in working with states that do not agree with his worldview. It has been, to put it mildly, a chaotic first few weeks of his administration. I want to take some time to share with the people of Washington State how we are responding, and importantly, the principles that are guiding us as we deal with these challenges moving forward. I'll admit up front, my talking points are longer than usual for a press conference. My apologies. I've worked hard to scale them back. But there's a lot that's going on, and I do want to discuss that. The core message that I have for Washingtonians is that we are dealing with the chaos that is coming down from Washington, D.C., but at the same time, we are going to preserve our values as a state, and importantly, we're going to move forward on the issues that unite us as a state, to make our state more affordable, to make it more safe, to make opportunities available for all Washingtonians. We're moving forward on that. But we have some challenges we're dealing with, and I want to talk about those. First, I'm going to start with a brief update on where we are with the Trump administration's attempts to freeze federal funding. Next, I'll talk about a range of issues, including reproductive freedom and health care for transgender individuals, diversity, equity, and inclusion, threats to Muslim Americans, threats to undocumented residents, and also some threats to clean energy jobs. First, I'm going to start with funding. Washington State receives, as some of you know, approximately $27 billion in federal funding in the last fiscal year. That's approximately 1/3 of our state budget. As you also know, a significant amount of funding was frozen or threatened to be frozen in the last 3 weeks, including the Department of Transportation's hydrogen stations, DNR wildlife preparations, and NIH funding to research institutions. Currently, as of this morning, and this is moving target pretty much every day, currently $162 million in federal funds are frozen that we're aware of. Most of that is in the Department of Commerce, $156 million from the Solar for All program and $3 million under the Climate Pollution Reduction Planning Grant. The Department of Natural Resources also has about $3.3 million intended for wildlife preparedness that is frozen. Things are literally changing daily, if not hourly. So as an example, as Joe Wynn will probably speak about, that $150 or $160 million connected, for example, in part with the Solar for All program was frozen on Monday, then unfrozen, but refrozen this morning. Okay, so we're literally changing our speaking points in real time. I want to be very clear, we are continuing to fight for those funds. And thanks especially to the whole team, and in particular to Attorney General Nick Brown and his excellent team, including the Wing Luke Civil Rights Division, who of course have been in court on making sure that the President must follow the law when it comes to freezing any potential funds. This is a daily issue that we grapple with, as you might imagine, because any frozen funds can have a huge impact on a whole range of issues. I want to be clear that the freezing of funds is not the only threat to federal funding. So for example, United States Attorney General Pam Bondi sent a directive declaring that sanctuary jurisdictions can lose access to federal law enforcement funding. The Department of Justice has filed lawsuits, for example, against the state of Illinois and the city of Chicago. I think just yesterday they also filed a lawsuit against the state of New York and, I believe, New York City regarding some of these policies. Washington State receives approximately $58 million in federal funding from the Department of Justice. I'll speak more about this a bit later, but we believe those funds are not impacted by this directive. But again, I'll talk a bit more about that later on. Regardless of how many victories we win in court, thanks to the hard work of the AG's office, we know that the President's efforts to wield federal appropriations as a hammer in order to force Washington to change our values is unlikely to stop anytime soon. Fortunately, the 10th Amendment protects the rights of states like Washington State to set public policies as long as those policies do not conflict with laws passed by Congress or the Constitution. I'm going to address several of these areas where the Trump administration is targeting specific groups or programs and detail our approach. First, reproductive freedom and health care for transgender Washingtonians. Let's start with health care. When it comes to health care, Washington State will be guided by doctors and other health care providers, not politicians in Washington, D.C. In contrast, we've seen the consequences when states do not follow this principle. Pregnant people turned away from emergency rooms or having to access health care in another state, like Washington State, because doctors are afraid they'll be prosecuted for caring for their patients. Washington State strongly supports reproductive rights, and a majority of Americans agree that they don't want the government deciding what type of medical care they or their loved ones can receive. The transgender community in particular is under attack right now, including their ability to access health care. As you know, if an individual's sex assigned at birth is incongruent with their innate gender identity, this can cause varying degrees of gender dysphoria, a serious medical condition. That's not a political opinion, that's a medical fact. Gender dysphoria is a medical diagnosis contained in the American Psychiatric Association's DSM 5th edition. Healthcare provided to treat gender dysphoria is just that. It's healthcare. In Washington State, we will not treat healthcare like a political football. Because Washington's healthcare laws will be informed by healthcare professionals, we will continue protecting access to a full range of reproductive healthcare options as well as healthcare for transgender individuals. Healthcare is a human right and a civil right, and in Washington State, we will respect that. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. President Trump has put a target on DEI. In fact, he seems to be obsessed with it. Here's our response to these attacks. Washington State will continue to use state dollars to promote anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion. These values improve our government. They make us more responsive to the people. Cities and counties in Washington State will face their own choices, but Washington State will, within the budget constraints we face, will preserve trainings and programs that improve government. Programs, by the way, that ensure that we see and consider the impacts of policies and decisions on every Washingtonian, not just those who can access government, not just those who can afford to hire a lobbyist. Every single Washingtonian is considered when we all make big decisions that impact, guess what, all Washingtonians. That seems fair to me, that seems right to me. We're going to continue doing that. President Trump will find that many laws passed by Congress and appropriations made by Congress explicitly acknowledge the goals of diversity and inclusivity, and we will raise those points with the courts when necessary. It is, of course, possible some federal funding in this area will be eliminated. However, the President cannot stop Washington State from using our resources to advance our values. We will ensure that our government represents all Washingtonians, including those that have been historically marginalized and underrepresented. We're also going to help our employees feel a greater sense of belonging in our state. Muslim Americans. During his last administration, the first group that President Trump targeted was, of course, Muslim Americans. We stopped him with that first Muslim travel ban. It has been reported that President Trump is preparing a revamped travel ban. In September, he said, quote, "Remember the famous travel ban? We did not take people from certain areas of the world. We're not taking them from infested countries." Look, we'll be resolute in the following principle as a state. We respect the civil rights of all Washingtonians, regardless of their faith, and we will do everything in our power to protect those rights. Undocumented residents. Washington state law is very clear. State and local officials, including law enforcement, may not share non-public information about an individual's immigration status in a non-criminal matter, except as required by federal law or court order. This is the Keep Washington Working Act. In short, the law ensures that the president cannot commandeer our state and local resources. The United States Constitution, thankfully, protects states against this type of federal overreach. It is important to remember that the Keep Washington Working Act serves two very important purposes. Number one, it protects the hardworking Washingtonians who are abiding by our state laws and serving our state in a variety of ways. It keeps these individuals working and contributing to our economy and businesses, which is why it's called the Keep Washington Working Act. Second, the Keep Washington Working Act protects our scarce law enforcement resources. Washington ranks last in the number of law enforcement officers we have per capita. I'm working with the legislature and Senators Jeff Holey and Senator Manka Dhingra to change that. But the point is, we have real public safety challenges in Washington state, and we cannot afford to divert scarce law enforcement resources away from solving crimes and making our communities safer. Washington's Keep Washington Working Act is consistent with and requires compliance with binding federal law. Consequently, we are confident that Washington's law and policies do not violate Attorney General Pam Bondi's directive, and there's no basis for withholding funding, some of which supports our state's multi-jurisdictional drug and gang task forces. If necessary, we will see the president in court if he attempts to block this funding. Here's where I agree with the president. Undocumented individuals convicted of serious felonies in Washington state are placed in the Department of Corrections custody. Washington law, including the Keep Washington Working Act, does not prohibit the Department of Corrections from sharing information with federal immigration authorities regarding individuals in its physical custody. Groups that I respect have asked that I seek to change this law or proactively direct the Department of Corrections to cease providing information to ICE. I will not do that. My direction is that the Department of Corrections continue to lawfully work with federal immigration authorities regarding those individuals. It's one thing if the president wants to invest additional resources in deportation actions against undocumented Washingtonians who commit serious crimes. However, the overwhelming majority of undocumented residents of our state, and every other state for that matter, are decent, hardworking, law-abiding residents who contribute significantly to our economy and our communities. We will protect law-abiding Washington families, and Tana Sen will have more to say about that in a few minutes. Finally, clean energy jobs. The president is targeting funding that supports the clean energy economy. The primary impact to federal funding in the first weeks of the Trump administration involves federal funding that supports the clean energy economy. Because the president is attempting to disinvest from clean energy jobs in all 50 states, somewhat oddly, he's actually presenting us with an opportunity to lead the nation. Because we're not stepping back on these issues, we're stepping up on these issues. 3 months ago, Washingtonians overwhelmingly voted to preserve the Climate Commitment Act. That act allows Washington to invest significantly in the same jobs that President Trump seems determined to eliminate. Manufacturing jobs that create clean energy infrastructure like electrification, solar wind, hydrogen, and fusion. Forestry jobs that help us fight wildfires. Whether the president likes it or not, the transition to a clean energy economy is coming to Washington state. President Trump may be setting back the United States, but he's giving us a head start on leading the nation, and we will seize that opportunity. You can expect announcements from me in the coming weeks about investments that we are making in exciting companies in Washington state that will create good-paying jobs in the clean energy economy all across Washington state. To conclude, my hope is that every Washingtonian, regardless of who they voted for president, can get behind the following principles. We will protect the civil rights of all Washingtonians. We will respect the right to health care that is prescribed by a doctor, not a politician. We will stand up for all law-abiding residents who are contributing to our state and our economies, regardless of their immigration status. We will create good-paying jobs in all corners of our state. My message to President Trump is fairly simple. I'll work with you on areas of common interest, but you're making it tough, okay? But I'm still committed to that. I really am. But if you overstep your authority, we will stand up to you. President Trump's chaos will not stop us from working on behalf of the people. We will continue to do our job and serve the everyday needs of Washingtonians while we are protecting Washingtonians from any cruel and unconstitutional actions. Is what's happening in D.C. taking some of my time as governor? Yes, of course it is. Does it take most of my time? No, it does not. And I want Washingtonians to know that. We are, as a group, and many others who could not be here today because they've got busy jobs they're doing as well, but we are all committed to this, okay? We're going to deal with what's coming at us from Washington, D.C., and we're working very hard to be extremely coordinated in that effort. And at the same time, preserve our values as a state and move forward on the important issues we're facing. Last weekend I was in Ellensburg, speaking to prospective college students and their parents. Why? I was reminding them to fill out their FAFSA form. You guys know about this. Thanks to our legislative leaders, we have incredible opportunities for financial assistance for so many Washingtonians. It's incredible what the state has done to make that available. Guess what? We do a lousy job of getting students and their parents to fill out the form. We rank near the bottom. We need to change that. That's why I was there in person to talk to those students and those parents about the form and encourage them to complete it. We're working hard with a bipartisan group of legislators. I mentioned Senator Holy and Senator Dingra to create a $100 million grant program to hire more law enforcement officers across our state. We're moving forward to make Washington a better state and a more affordable state and a safer state. We're going to continue fighting to ensure that every Washingtonian, regardless of where they live, whom they love, what they believe, how they identify, where they work, or where they were born, has access to a quality education and skills training, health care, safe communities, clean air and water, and safe work environments. We will keep fighting to make our state safer, government more efficient, ferries more reliable, and our state more affordable for families. We're going to keep moving forward. We're not going to change our values. In fact, we are going to lean into them. That is how we're going to get through this. That's how we're going to deal with this. That's how we're going to be successful as a state. We've been through this before, and I think we came through it pretty well, thanks to a lot of hardworking people working very hard, and we're going to do it again. Thanks so much, and next up I think is going to be Nick Brown.
First of all, thank you to Governor Ferguson for his remarks and for inviting me to participate today. I had not thought about it until walking in the press conference this morning that the last time I was at a press conference in this office was under somewhat similar circumstances when this administration and this state was taking aggressive action against the first Trump administration, challenging the Trump Muslim ban and talking to the public about the actions that we were taking to continue to defend all Washingtonians. So it is good to be back in the governor's office. I want to reiterate what I reiterated recently, that when I took office as the Attorney General, I made a commitment to the people of Washington to defend the U.S. Constitution and the laws of Washington State. And we will continue to do that no matter what. Unfortunately, in the first few weeks of this president's administration, we've seen an all-out attack on the rule of law. And over again, the President of the United States and his administration has failed to follow the Constitution, has failed to follow laws passed by Congress, and we cannot let that stand. And like Governor Ferguson and many of the people that are up here today, I am hearing countless concerns about the impact of the president's inability to follow the law, the harms that they are personally facing and dealing with, from loss of funding to loss of health care to loss of their legal right to be here in the United States. And when the president harms people and when he violates the law, it is incumbent upon all of us to work collaboratively to do everything we can to defend the law. And so thus far, the AG's office has participated in 4 separate lawsuits. We are leading on 2 lawsuits to defend transgender health care and on birthright citizenship, and we have joined our colleagues in other states to make sure that we are protecting funding that has been authorized by Congress and to protect the grants that are given out by the National Institute of Health. All of these issues get to things that protect Washingtonians and defend their rights and liberty and provide for their protection. And the next 4 years, we're going to have to keep a closeful watch on what is happening from Washington, D.C., because like Governor Ferguson reiterated, we have huge jobs with massive responsibilities. And although the work that we do to challenge and stand up for Washingtonians in the face of what's happening from D.C. often gets the headlines, it is not the bread and butter of what we do. Every day, the AG's office, like any other agency in this state, is working hard to improve the lives of Washingtonians, irrespective of what is happening in Washington, D.C. But there is immense harm that is being created by this president and his actors. And we will continue to watch and continue to litigate where we have to. And we will undoubtedly have more cases in the future and perhaps in the very near future. But I, like Governor Ferguson, are driven by protecting Washington law and protecting Washington values. And my only message to the President of the United States is to follow the law. You are in control of the United States House of Representatives, the United States Senate. You have cabinet directors appointed, and the majority of the Supreme Court has been appointed by Republican presidents. Follow the damn law. It's not that hard. But time and time again, this president has exhibited his disdain for the U.S. Constitution, and we cannot let that happen. And so we will continue to use our processes in our courts to make sure that the president, like anybody else, follows the law. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Tana Sen, Secretary of the Department of Children, Youth, and Families. And I just want to thank Governor Ferguson for getting busy in his first few weeks to protect Washingtonians while the Trump administration has been attacking them. One of those protections was with his Executive Order 2504, which created the Family Separation Response Task Force. It was a clear message to families across the state, especially of mixed immigration status, that this Washington stands with you. We will be there to support your children if they find themselves separated due to deportation or detainment. I'm pleased to have the Department of Children, Youth, and Families leading that task force. We're already convening state agencies, OSPI, Washington State Patrol, the Office of Refugee and Immigrant Assistance, and a dozen others, to ensure that no wrong door, only a warm handoff, is available to support everyone's rights. Our goal is to ensure families and community know where to go and who to turn to if they have questions about the needs, the safety, and the stability of their children and youth who may be caught in the web of immigration enforcement action. We will ensure that state agency policies are clear and our procedures are in place for numerous scenarios families and communities might face. We are identifying points of contacts at state and local agencies, public universities, in religious communities, and high-activity industries to facilitate connection, communication, and assistance. We will be engaging with legislators and community partners to see how we can better support them. And I want you to know, I want all Washingtonians to know, that every decision we make will have Washington children's well-being front and center. Which is why, even as we're doing this task force, we are continuing to provide high-quality, affordable childcare for thousands of Washingtonians. We are working to protect kids and families who are experiencing child abuse and neglect, and we are working to support homeless youth, older foster children, and families who need additional support, because those are the values of Washington State.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Governor Ferguson, for the opportunity, and for our Attorney General as well. Look, Washington State's economy is under direct attack from the Trump administration. There are two major crises that we are facing right now. One, the illegal freeze of federal energy funds, and the other is a push for a dangerous trade war. Families and businesses and jobs are at risk, and those who are most impacted likely will be from rural communities, farmers, overburdened communities, and the like. In Washington State, we want to prioritize the services that we provide to our families. We know that this is critical of importance to us right now. At the Department of Commerce, we are in touch with all the consulates of countries that have been named and potential trade tariff and potential wars. We are working with our Office of Economic Development to work with impacted industries and individuals. We have legal aid services that we provide. We're also working with businesses to help diversify their opportunities as well, where if we're going to see some potential impacts, we want to make sure that we are promoting goods and services in other areas. But make no mistake, this will have far-reaching impacts. The freezes for our energy funds will increase costs for families and businesses. There will be losses of jobs in the clean energy sector. We will lose out on opportunities for manufacturing to come to Washington State without these funds. Our infrastructure will be weaker. We'll be more at risk of wildfires because of these as well. So we take this extremely seriously. Our group at Commerce, under the guidance of our Governor Ferguson, has been working on these even before the executive orders came into place. Unfortunately, this was not unexpected in the sense of the attacks that we'd have in Washington State. The velocity and the egregiousness of the unconstitutional executive orders certainly are a surprise, but we are working hard to ensure that our families are protected. And bottom line is that this Washington cannot wait while the Trump administration plays politics with our future. This is investments that were made by Congress, signed into law, and it harms Washington and harms businesses. So we are here and stand ready to protect our communities and to serve the folks who have sent us here. Thank you.
So have to take questions. Also, we have other statewide who are here, so feel free to direct your questions to them as well. Yes, go right ahead.
Two-part question. Right now, we've got Elon Musk and J.D. Vance essentially saying we don't have to do what the courts will tell us to do. Do you have a counter plan to that? And my second question is that Trump likes to retaliate. I mean, it's an incredibly obvious pattern. Are you scared that Trump will retaliate Washington as that liberal thing in the corner of the nation that I really don't care about?
Sure, happy to take both those. I suspect Nick may want to weigh in on at least the first one as well. We were actually chatting about it just a few minutes ago. So I think what I'd say to a very important question about, hey, what happens if any administration doesn't follow a court order? What does that mean? So what I would say about that is I've thought about that a great deal, as you might imagine, recently. I think it's fair to point out that in his first administration, when we beat him in court dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of times, his administration followed those court orders. I am concerned about comments from the Vice President, for example, regarding the potential to ignore a court order. I forget the name of the U.S. Senator recently who tweeted out something to the extent of was unhappy about a court decision that went against the president, and that U.S. Senator referred to that being a judicial coup, was the phrase that I think that he used in a tweet. In short, what I would say is that everything that's happening currently with the administration, as chaotic as I believe it to be, okay, and as challenging as I believe it to be, and as harmful to so many Washingtonians I certainly believe it to be, I believe that so far we're working in a world that I understand, right? The AG's office can file a lawsuit, a court can stop it, and the administration follows that, right? If, however, any president chose not to follow a court order, that I can only describe as, and there aren't really the right words for it to be clear, but as a absolute red line, underscored multiple times. That is nothing short of a constitutional crisis. So I don't think anybody has a sort of plan for that necessarily, right? Because that is essentially becomes uncharted territory. But what I would say is, we are mindful of that possibility, concerned about some comments I've seen, and obviously we are giving thought to what would be an appropriate response, and we're not the only ones giving some thought to that. So I'll let maybe Nick respond to that as well, if you want to add to that, Nick, and then I'll get to your second question, which you may have to remind me of. Yeah, go ahead.
What I would just first say is that the Vice President comments and others like it are, the amount of ignorance that comes in the tweet like that is pretty astounding. It's historically inaccurate and dangerous. And we will take those one step at a time, and we will be very watchful. And at least in the beginning, we will treat anyone who breaks a court order or refuses to follow it like any other person. First step is you move for contempt, and you move to enforce such orders. And I will note that the challenges that have been brought by this AG's office and our colleague states is not only charges or complaints against the president, it's also against a number of agency heads and agency directors. And the bluster that we see from the presidency and the vice president is one thing, but it would be quite another thing for a cabinet level agency or director, for example, to ignore a court order when they personally, in their official capacity, could be held in contempt and subject to judicial enforcement. But the governor's right. Thus far, the process is working as it should. We've challenged in every case that's been brought by an attorney general across the country, the court has issued a temporary restraining order to stop the president's orders, and thus far, that is proceeding the way it happened. It's supposed to happen. But if it doesn't, we'll move to the next step and take it one day at a time.
And I think I remember your second question was, hey, are we worried about retaliation? I mean, another important question, and you know what I would say about that is having thought about that a fair amount, going back to AG days as well, is, you know, I think that in making decisions, this is my experience, is that sometimes it's complicated making decisions. You got a lot to think about, but I'm, you know, my team's heard me say this before, that you have to decide what's like the core issue that's going on in whatever decision you're making about anything in life as a leader. And on that issue, I think what's core is being aware that things could happen, right? That could happen as a result of an action that we take. I think what's core is preserving Washington's values, right? And standing up for all Washingtonians, their civil rights, and their freedoms. And that's the core thing. And I can't let other factors deviate me from that course. You know, in other words, if I was a Washingtonian and my rights are being violated, I was a Muslim American during the first Muslim travel ban, I wouldn't want my government to be like, hey, I'm kind of thinking about what the impacts might be if I challenge that Muslim travel ban. I'd be like, hey, wait a second. You know, I'm being harmed by that travel ban. That's impacting me and my family. Do something about that. That's what I would think if I was that person. So for me, I just try to channel that. And so I'm not underestimating or I'm not blind to the potential impacts of those decisions. I certainly am, and we talk about that a lot as a team. Trust me. Yeah, we do. And we do our best to mitigate that. But at the end of the day, I think what the majority of Washingtonians want is for their leaders, and we all have a different role up here, right, to be true to those values and do the best we can by them.
Governor Ferguson,
Yeah.
There's a lot of critics that are saying, you know, Ferguson's still obsessed with President Trump, the other side of it, right? And we've got huge problems here in this Washington, potentially crushing tax proposal increases under consideration, budget deficit, and people want you to pay attention to this Washington. And do you feel like you've just been forced to spend a lot of time focused on the Trump administration? Do you feel like you might need to balance a little bit more on this Washington?
I think my remarks were very, very clear on this. Very clear. I'm focused on moving the state forward. We're going to deal with chaos that comes from Washington, D.C. Washingtonians expect that because it's impacting Washingtonians. It's impacting our budget. Those things are real. Trust me, they're very real. And so I can't just ignore that because that's inconvenient, you know, to the rest of my job. But the message, and I'll repeat it again, is we're going to deal with what's coming in from Washington, D.C. that's harming Washingtonians, that's impacting our budget, that's impacting jobs in a negative way. And at the same time, we're moving our state forward. Whether it's our budget, whether it's making Washington more affordable, whether it's public safety, I think all the issues I touched on in my opening statement. So I think that's the job. I think that's what Washingtonians expect, and that's certainly what I intend to do.
Governor, you had mentioned transgender rights, and there is the current suit from the Attorney General. There was also an executive order about transgender youth in sports. Have you given any sort of guidance to the WIAA on how to handle that executive order?
So I'll see if Nick wants to add anything or not, but the WIAA, as you know, does decide. They put policies in place, and I trust them to make good decisions moving forward in light of Washington state law that provides civil rights protections for more individuals than are at the federal level, including those based on gender and gender identity. So we have an organization that makes those decisions. I've not been in direct contact with them myself. I don't know, Nick, if you want it. Okay. So, but they're the folks who are making the decisions. Next question.
Governor Ferguson, your state agencies were tasked with submitting reduction target proposals
Yeah.
by last week.
Yes.
I'm curious, are you going to announce those anytime soon, or is it about them? And also, can you tell us whether or not all state agencies met their targets?
So yes, we're going to be having a conversation just like this around the week of February 24th, I think. So we haven't picked the exact day. I think we're trying to figure it out. It'll either be Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday of that week. And the plan is to come forward with our proposals for how to meet that 6% reduction for most state agencies. Some may have to take more, some may take less. As you know, some were exempted, like public safety. But yes, and I think the other part of your question was, hey, did agencies essentially meet that? What I would say is I'm still being briefed on, as you might imagine, it's a lot of information that's come in. What I would say is, just as a very initial reaction, again, I've not been briefed across the board, but I would say for the most part, agencies leaned into it. You know, are there a couple of exceptions? Yes, and I've communicated back to those entities that they need to go back and give me something I can work with. And so, but we'll have a whole lot more to say in another week or so.
Can you tell us what those agencies were?
I'll wait till they respond to me before any further comment on that. Thanks.
Yeah,
Drew,
we're sticking on the budget.
Yeah.
If we're preparing for deep cuts from the feds, are you meeting with budget writers? Could this increase? I know you've talked about taxes
Yeah.
being a last resort.
Yeah.
If we have to fill that gap,
Yeah.
does that move up on your motivation scale?
Yes, I meet with the budget team on a regular basis. That's a big part of my each day right now, as you might imagine. I think your question goes to, you know, why we're dealing with President Trump is because, to your earlier questions, because what he's doing is making our budget situation not just worse, but potentially a lot worse. And our budget challenges are significant to start with. Anything that adds to that challenge is unhelpful in the extreme. So yes, that is one reason why, Drew, we are having a lot of conversations in real time. Our poor state treasurer has to take a phone call from me literally every single day to talk about, hey, what's going on? What are you seeing? What's happening, right? And all of our agencies as well is a all-the-time conversation to monitor as best we can, right? We're a big, complex government. As best we can, what's happening in real time and adjusting accordingly to it. So, yes, and that's why, I mean, I appreciate Nick and his team. You know, the Attorney General and his team are doing a great job taking that on and being successful, filing for contempt when appropriate if they're not releasing those funds. I think we have time for a couple more. Yes, yep.
Can I ask about two questions? The sanctuary states and jurisdictions that are being targeted by the U.S. Attorney General. Can you talk a little bit about how Washington's sanctuary policies compare to those places that have already been sued or targeted, and how you're preparing if you think Washington could be next?
Yeah, I guess what I'd say is what I'll ask Brown to do is provide some specific examples of some differences, if that's okay. I don't want to get something wrong right here, right now. But there are definitely differences between Washington state law, for example, and Illinois law. Okay, when it comes to, you know, the term sanctuary jurisdiction, I'm not really wild about it. It means different things for different jurisdictions, right? There's not one uniform definition, which is why it's a little bit challenging to even utilize it. So Washington's law is different in some significant ways from, for example, Illinois. And so, as you might imagine, you know, the AG's office and the state as a whole is, as we prepare for many potential things from the administration, that is one of them. And so we are confident that we would be successful if the Department of Justice, right, filed some legal challenge, for example, against the state of Washington. And we're happy to provide sort of a bit more detail on a couple examples. There's a question on the phone, is that right? Let's turn to someone on the phone. Is there somebody on the phone who's got a question?
They just dropped some questions in the chat.
It's up to you, however you think is best.
If the federal government takes away certain rights with executive orders, like only recognizing male and female health care for those part of the LGBTQ plus community, what immediate actions will the state of Washington take?
I'm not sure, Nick, if you want, I mean, I'll turn to maybe Nick for initial response, yeah.
Well, I would just say we'll look closely at any order that purported to do just that. And I think both on that issue and all the issues we're talking about, we need to keep in mind that Washington state law remains the same. And Washington has some of the best and most protective laws in the country when it comes to immigration issues, when it comes to recognizing health care protection, when it comes to the legal protections enshrined in our state law to protect the LGBTQ community. And so the president is taking a lot of actions. Thus far, we have stopped all of those actions that we've been engaged in challenging, but Washington state law remains the same. And so although people have legitimately some well-founded fear from what we're seeing in Washington, D.C., I think we should be reminded that thanks to the great work of our state legislature and governors past, we've got some incredible protections here, and we will continue to defend those moving forward.
Yep, go for it.
With regards to your $100 million proposed state grant program for local police departments, what would you say to bystanders, journalists, and demonstrators who sustained permanent and serious injury during racial justice protests in 2020, in which police departments, namely the Seattle Police Department, were found in violation by federal courts with regards to failing to respect people's constitutional rights? The department cost the city of Seattle $10 million in a class action lawsuit in which 48 demonstrators and 2 journalists had to go to court to actually receive compensation for kind of injury and trauma the Seattle Police Department has provided no answers or apologies for. And the Seattle City Council has recently reauthorized the department to use less lethal weapons, same ones
Right.
that they used in 2020 on protesters. Why should they be getting millions and millions more in taxpayer money when they have failed to demonstrate to the courts to date that they can actually respect people's rights during protests?
Yeah, I hear your question, but I'm also aware that we rank last per capita in number of law enforcement officers we have in the United States. And so I hear your thoughts and what's in your statement, but we need to move forward on making sure that Washington is a safe place for all Washingtonians, and we should not be ranked last. There are going to be a lot of things we need to do to address that issue, but one of them I think that will be helpful is this $100 million grant fund. It's got strong bipartisan support. I'm looking forward to signing it. Maybe we got time for one more. Yeah, go ahead.
Is there any immediate dollars right away, emergency funds to maybe fill in some of the areas that, funds that were frozen through, say, clean energy projects? Is there something right now that the state is having to do to fill in? And just number 2, pointing out that this is quite a press corps here that's with you today. I'm wondering what kind of cadence we can expect from regular appearances with the media that you'll be providing in the future.
I guess stay tuned on. That's my second press conference in 28 days on the job, I think, and have had numerous conversations with the media, but I suspect you'll be seeing a fair amount of me in the coming weeks and months as well. I'm not sure if on the, yeah, Joe, do you want to take on the first question? Yeah.
First off, a lot of the federal funding that we have is going towards programs that are being stood up right now. Thank goodness the CCA was protected and is still live. A lot of those resources were augmenting some of the federal dollars as well. So we still have resources depending on the program to move forward. There are some that are federally specific that will be on pause. So we have some funds to keep some things going. Obviously the federal impacts will be a pretty significant one if this unconstitutional executive order is upheld.
But no like a specific project yet that's right now out of the gate.
Oh, the Solar for All one is the main one that is certainly being impacted. Also, local planning grants for decarbonization of small cities as well. And then, candidly, I think one thing that I worry about is the grid modernization, just in general. Yep.
And just on that, just to add briefly to what Joe said is, I mean, obviously we are in the courts, right, we're certain, hey, these funds cannot be withheld in the way that it's been done. So obviously we're in the courts to make sure we're getting those, and we've had a lot of success with that already, funds that have been frozen, getting unfrozen. So we're going to continue to do that, and so that is a part of the efforts we're doing as well. Appreciate everybody's questions and being here today. We so appreciate it, and hope you all have a great day. Thanks so much, everybody. Thanks, Ned.
Yeah.